Hey y'all, good morning. Here to talk about underground utilities. This is Decker Housley. We're giving away the farm. Today we're going to chat about the basics of utilities, how we get them from point A to point B, relative cost expectations, and a little bit of what it entails. So when you go and look at a piece of property, whether it's a residential lot, just from the street back to the site where you're going to have your house with the service running into your house, running utilities out to a property, whether it's a recreational property or a property for subdivision, utilities is a big consideration. It's a high cost item. It's under the burden cost line item, and it can be a costly expense, and it's one that you need to think about long before you get down the road of making that purchase or making the commitment to do the project. So we've got a few ruling bodies when it comes to site selection and how we're going to do the utilities. If we go aerial, typically what you'll see is the electric cooperative, or however your utilities are handled, is going to designate certain requirements: right away, unrestricted access back and forth to service the line. They're going to require a setback of all the trees and undergrowth to be removed. You'll see that as you look around at utility lines, at recently installed utility lines, aerial lines. The pro of aerial lines is that typically the utility company is going to be responsible for setting those poles and for stringing the aerial line from point A to point B. However, the utility company on the con side is not going to be required to do the groundwork beneath those aerial lines. So you're going to be required to do the removal of all of the trees and undergrowth to make it accessible and ready for them to come in. So, you know, there's some cost savings for sure associated with going aerial. If you're working through multiple neighbors to get to a piece of property, you may run into some roadblocks with the neighbors not wanting their land to be cut, trees to be removed, ground to be disturbed, and then granting that access, which you'll have the easement access, whether you're aerial or underground. You're still going to have that basic requirement to allow the underground, or rather to allow the utility company out as they need to service. One of the other cons of an aerial line is it's obviously subject to trees falling, storms, lightning strikes, all that good stuff. So you know you have some service loss that could happen with aerial lines, maybe more so than underground. You most certainly can have underground service loss as well. When it comes to underground utilities, you've got a much higher burden cost. You've got, again, the cooperative, the utility company is going to designate the width and depth of your trench for your utility to run. They're going to tell you whether or not you've got to use a certain size conduit, a certain style of conduit. They're going to specify an amount of on the run, what they call pull boxes, when the wire is simply going to be terminating up and back down into another run, so that you can essentially pull off of that box, service the line, isolate, etc. It's also a spot where along a line you can add additional service out to other pieces of property, back out to your property, or if you're in a development scenario, you'll have your multiple pull boxes to access each of your tracks that you're doing. With that specification of width and depth of the trench or ditch, that's where your costs come in. So in a state like Tennessee, we're full of rock. If we're digging typically 36 plus inches of depth and sometimes a minimum width of 12 inches, you're talking about a lot of contact to rock potentially. And so with that, you go from needing potentially just a trencher to all of a sudden needing a backhoe like I've got, or an excavator like I got behind me. Maybe a Mini X. This is just at about 50 horse and considered a Mini X, not your big track hoe that you see out on a big job. you might need a big track hoe. You might need a chisel to basically jackhammer the rock if you have to, in order to get through a certain area that just might be bedrock, might be large stone that is too difficult to remove. So there is a large cost consideration with the type of soil and matrix you're going to run through, with what you might encounter, especially against what the utility is going to require you to dig at. And with that, you know, you need to take into consideration the time and the cost with that. If you are typically paying a contractor to do this work, it is by linear foot. That's not always the case, but around here, that's how we estimate these projects. And you will see a caveat in that bid that says, if we run into rock, ... because it's just one of those things that's almost a given, and it will most certainly delay your project. We're out here right now on site doing over 7,000 linear feet of utility, of underground electric service, and about 1,200 linear feet of water. And we have had runs between pole boxes where it's been great, easy to dig, and we've had runs where it's multiple days of getting through the rock, removing rock, and to meet the minimum specifications for the ditch. So that kind of gives you a basic overlay of what to expect. Again, cost is a big consideration, and most certainly you can get a pretty good estimate from your utility company and from a contractor in terms of what it'll take to install that service, with some caveats again for what's going to happen as it relates to the basic components of what a utility and electric service is. From the pole that you see on the road to your house or to a property, there's just a few items. You come down off that service pole, and there'll typically be a transformer up on the pole, or if you're pulling off a ground utility, you're going to run down into what we call conduit. That conduit is going to be laid empty in the ditch with a pull wire inside that conduit. The utility company is going to specify, like I said, these pull boxes along the way. So you'll have the green square boxes that you typically see all over the place running, whether it's from the road to your house or from, you know, down a road to your property or through your property, depending upon your project. And ultimately, that wire and that conduit is going to terminate into a transformer box. And that will be basically where your service for your house, your barn, your buildings, your sites will pull from. So you'll have cost associated with the conduit. You'll have cost associated with all the miscellaneous that goes with conduit and the pull wire. You're going to have cost to the utility company for the wire and the labor to pull and set those pull boxes in the transformer. You'll have the cost of those all worked into your bid, and then you'll have your unknowns, and those unknowns in the burden cost can again be high. So please keep that in mind and educate yourself early and often on this process, and anticipate that your target number, if you've got a range that you're working with your contractor and he says from point A to point B would be a cost of, I think, here to here, always err on that high side as you're setting your budget for your project, because ultimately we run into things out there. It's just the nature of the beast. So obviously it's good to be prepared for that and have an expectation for that. Ultimately, I would say that underground utility wins out over aerial any day of the week if you can afford it. It's aesthetically more pretty, beautiful. It lends to the property. It gives you some flexibility in where you want to go. There's a higher cost associated with it, but I would also say when it comes to the value of your property or your project, it most certainly adds value to the project. I would 10 times out of 10 select a property that had underground utilities over a property that had aerial utilities if I had a choice for me and the client. So with all that being said, I'd say if you've got a project coming up, if you're out shopping to build a house, a custom home, or if you're just looking to develop a piece of property, you need to start getting educated on your burden cost. And specifically for this video, you know, we're talking about electric utilities and water utilities. Water is basically the same as power in such that you're digging a ditch, you're laying a pipe, and you're getting from one point to the other with all those same costs in between. And we'll cover water in another video. Other than the basic framework is essentially the same, but there's some other thoughts and cost considerations when it comes to water. But in a nutshell, I would say not something to shy away from, but something to be educated on. So if you have any questions, obviously our contact info is always in the bio, at Farmer Dickey or at DRH Land on Instagram. Look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.